A ruthless Manhattan dealmaker met a Brooklyn street artist in the most unlikely place, and what happened next changed both their lives forever. This isn't just a story about wealth and struggle. It's about choosing who you are when the world tells you who to be, about second chances, and about the quiet courage it takes to love across a line everyone else insists you can't cross. Before we begin, comment below and tell us where you're watching from, because this is one love story you'll never forget. It started with a downpour that made the city smell like steel and rain and coffee grounds. Ethan Vale stood beneath the awning of a glass tower on Park Avenue, the sort of building that pretended it never touched the street. He was 32, a vice president at Hawthorne Capital, famous for turning dying neighborhoods into luxury portfolios. His charcoal suit looked pressed by a laser. His phone 3 red badges. A dozen calendar blocks vibrated like a living thing. Across the river, under the Manhattan Bridge, Maya Reyes tightened the bow of her violin and stared down the rain as if daring it to stop her from finishing a sketch taped to the side of her instrument case. She was 26, a Pratt grad with a portfolio she guarded the way other people guarded their secrets. Her hair was wet, a crown of dark curls escaping the bright scarf she wore even on the grayest days. Between songs, she penciled the outlines of an idea she didn't know how to finish, a mural of 2 hands reaching for each other, one smeared with paint, the other wearing a signet ring. They met because the city likes collisions. Ethan's driver took a wrong turn to dodge a spill of flashing lights near the FDR. Traffic froze in Dumbo, a snarl of honks and trapped umbrellas. The rain slowed. A violin began to sing. The sound wove through the open car window before Ethan could close it. A melody so clean it cut a window into a day that had been nothing but fogged glass. Not fancy stage perfection. Something raw, the kind of sweetness you only find when you've run out of time and play anyway. His driver glanced back. "Want me to roll up, Mr. Vale?" "Wait," Ethan said, surprising himself. He stepped out into a puddle that swallowed the shine of his shoes and followed the notes to the girl with a violin. A half circle of people stood around her, some with phones, some with a stunned look of the briefly saved. On her case lay a few bills. Beside it, the taped sketch. Maya finished on a chord that trembled and resolved like a breath finally let go. She looked up, eyes quick, taking in the crowd without flinching. And then she saw him, everything about him broadcasting the Upper East Side, the rain beating on his black umbrella, the timepiece that could buy a semester of someone's life, the posture of a man used to winning rooms. "Requests?" she asked, pragmatic and fearless. "Do you know anything by Gershwin?" he asked, because it felt safer than admitting she'd already rearranged his afternoon. "Sure," she said, "but it'll cost you the bridge toll." She tilted her head toward the river. He smiled, surprised. He remembered how fair she played Rhapsody in Blue, as if she'd swallowed the skyline. Her bow darted and floated, and the familiar theme tugged the corners of his life into a simpler shape. He paid too much, or not enough, and was about to leave when the taped sketch caught him. 2 hands paint a ring like his own. "Yours?" he asked. Maya followed his gaze. "An idea for a mural. Community center on Kent Avenue wants something new. They're losing their lease. Thought maybe a piece that says we still belong." "Who's the landlord?" Ethan asked automatically, the reflex of a profession that measured stories in cash flows. "Some developer," she said, shrugging. "They changed names like they changed plans." A raindrop hit her sketch and bled a line through the ring. She didn't move to save it. She watched the water make its mark, and then, gently, she drew over it. A second line, a choice to keep what the world had given and make it part of the design. Ethan didn't ask why. That cracked something in him. He knew the developer. More than that, he worked for them. Hawthorne Capital owned the shell company that owned the limited partnership that owned the landlord layers built to look like distance. His driver honked softly. Time reasserted itself, the way it always does. But the line had been crossed. Already, the city had introduced to people who weren't supposed to meet. "What's your name?" he asked Maya, a steady look. "You, Ethan." "Thanks for the bridge," she said, nodding at the bills and the dry shoes. He glanced at the puddles, swallowing his Oxfords temporarily dry. "Then you'll survive," she said, grinning. "We all do." He was almost in the car when he turned back to center. "Who's organizing it?" "Mrs. Alvarez," she said, navy coat, sharper than scaffolding. "If you really want to help, talk to her." A challenge. A dare. Ethan's phone buzzed. His father's name, Richard Vale, flooding the screen. He let it ring. "Maybe I will," he said. "You won't," she said, but without bitterness, as if she'd learned not to anchor her hope to strangers' promises. "But if you do, we're at 317 Kent. Community art night, 7 p.m. Bring your suit. The kids like drawing on expensive things." He laughed. She tucked her violin into its case. The crowd thinned. The rain stopped pretending it would stop. The city breathed, and so did they. By the time the car pulled away, Ethan had already looked up 317 Kent. The shell company's name glared from his firm's internal database like a dare of its own. He didn't know yet that choosing to show up would put his career, his family loyalties, and everything he'd used to define himself on a collision course with a woman who played like the city sounded when it told the truth and he didn't. Know that Maya, who prided herself on reading people, had taken one look at his watch and guessed 1,000 wrong things about him, all of which would matter less than the one thing she couldn't see yet: the way he'd tried to change that night at 7:03 p.m. Ethan Vale walked into a room that didn't particularly want him there. The community center smelled like paint and possibility. Paper lanterns someone had made from old flyers swayed in the draft from a stubborn window. A sign read, "Art Night, no shoes on the blue mat, everyone gets a brush." The floor was a patchwork of tapes, tops, and a history of spills no one bothered to erase. Children darted like ideas you couldn't catch. Teenagers lounged, performing a kind of choreographed indifference that dropped whenever someone laughed too loudly. Maya stood near the back, holding 2 plastic cups of something vaguely lemonade-adjacent. When she saw Ethan, she blinked, recalibrated, and then smiled with the unhurried satisfaction of a person proven wrong in the best way. She handed him a cup. "You came," she said. "You doubted me." "Statistically," she said, "men in suits are very busy, especially when they have watches that can probably open bank vaults." "Just a watch," he said. "Nothing's just anything," she said, drifting toward a table where a boy with green marker stains on his fingers fought with a glue stick. "This is Junior. He thinks anything can be fixed with adhesive, usually." "True," Ethan said. Junior shot him a grave look. "Not leases," he said, as if he'd practiced the line. Maya winced, subtle as a cymbal crash. "Junior's mom Yari runs our after-school program. She found out last week that the landlord wants to reposition the building into what?" Ethan asked, even though he already knew. "Upscale retail on the first floor. Micro-apartments overhead. The sort of rooftop deck where people took photos of sunsets they could no longer see from the street. Something with quartz countertops," Maya said dryly. "We have a few months, maybe less, if they start testing the fire alarms again." Ethan scanned the room. Mrs. Alvarez Navicote, sharper than scaffolding, run a rag over a long folding table and motioned someone over without looking up. "Run if you must," her posture said. "The work will still be here when you get back." Maya led him over. "Mrs. A, this is Ethan." He paid the bridge toll in Dumbo and asked the right question. "He wants to help." Mrs. Alvarez looked him up and down. "You a lawyer? We need one." "I work in finance," Ethan said, bracing for it. She made a thoughtful noise like a hinge. "Finance wants our block," she said. "Finance thinks a latte tastes better on a street where the rent used to be someone's grandmother's medicine." "Mama," said a woman at the next table, her hair in a bun held with a pencil, "be nice." "I'm being accurate," Mrs. Alvarez said. Ethan didn't argue. "What have they sent?" he asked. "Notices, violations." Mrs. Alvarez's eyes narrowed. "You know about violations?" "I know the playbook," he said. "Start with noise complaints, then unsafe conditions. If those don't crack anything, bring in the city with inspections until the building's too expensive to fix." She folded her arms. "And which team do you play for?" Silence. Maya watched him, her expression unreadable. Ethan forced himself not to look away. "I worked for a firm that owns companies that do this," he said. A few heads turned. "And I memorized the playbook because I've used it. That's why I also know where the loopholes are. What papers to have to be posted when and where, what fines double if they miss a deadline, and which community boards actually make developers sweat." He took a breath. "If you'll let me, I can help you fight with her own rules." Mrs. Alvarez didn't soften exactly, but a new note entered her posture. Curiosity, risk assessment. "Why?" she asked. "Because the rain cut a line through a ring and she drew over it. Because I heard something today that made my life sound small. Because the last time I disappointed my mother, she was alive." None of these were answers you could give a room that had no reason to trust you. "Because it's right," he said simply. "The truth is sometimes as short as a light switch." Mrs. Alvarez made the hinge noise again, then slid a thick manila folder across the table. "Here, copies of everything the landlord sent, and everything we've filed. Don't keep the originals. And if you betray me, I'll publicly curse you in 2 languages. "I deserve 3, he said, and didn't flinch when she smiled despite herself. The folder felt heavier than it was. Inside, letters with seals, notices stacked like falling dominoes, photographs of repairs that looked like damage staged. For photographs he flipped, scanning building code citations. The LLC's address, Midtown law firm mailbox, dates that didn't line up, and name Camille Hartpint at the bottom of a memo. He knew her, senior partner at Hawthorne. Sharp as a blade, he'd trained under her, admired her, learned how to double evaluation before a coffee got cold. Maya watched his face. "Problem?" she asked. He closed the folder. "Nothing I can't work with." "Nothing," she echoed, measuring him. Again. Over the next hour, Ethan faded into the center's rhythm, children asking to draw on his cuff. Teenagers testing his reflexes with fast questions about why the city ignored them. He explained, in plain words, how to file a 311 complaint that wouldn't vanish, which inspectors to request by name, how to insist on translations without insulting anyone. He didn't patronize, he didn't perform, he wrote phone numbers on the whiteboard and watched as 3 moms snapped photos like they were taking down the names of saints. Maya, for her part, taught a tiny girl to hold a brush like a violin bow. "You guide," she said. You don't force paint listens if you're kind. Does he listen? The girl asked, pointing at Ethan. Sometimes, Maya said, and Ethan caught the smile that said she was daring him to try. When he finally left, Mrs. Alvarez walked him to the door. You're either a very good man, she said, or very good at pretending. Both, Ethan said. Honesty, again, as a tactic and a gift. If you stay, she said softly, this place will ask more of you than you think you can give. That's how we fix what's broken. With more than we think we have. He nodded, throat tight. I'll be back tomorrow, he said. Bring coffee, she replied. Real coffee. None of that foam circus. Outside the night had the electric blue of damp neon. Ethan stood in the glow and called a number he knew by heart. Camille, he said when she picked up. We need to talk about Kent Avenue. Already handled, she said briskly. Send me the revised CapEx schedule by 8. It's not handled, he said. You missed a required posting. They can stall for 90 days. A pause. You're on their side now. I'm on the side of not getting sued, he said smoothly. We should fix the posting, quietly. And we need to stop testing the fire alarms. It's illegal. Camille's laugh was small and sharp. Richard is going to love this, she said, meaning his father. Tell him yourself. I will, Ethan said, and hung up before she could hear the part of his breath that trembled. Ethan's father's office watched the park like a hawk. Richard Vale's desk was minimalist in the way expensive things are when they'd prefer you not notice how much they cost. Framed behind him a photo of a brownstone in Washington Heights, the place Richard liked to mention whenever reporters asked about his humble beginnings. He omitted the part where he married into money and learned to use it like a scalpel. Your assistant said you wanted FaceTime about some tiny Brooklyn deal, Richard said, making air quotes as if the gesture itself billed by the hour. Surprise me. Ethan set the manila folder on the desk. 317 Kent Avenue, the community center. We're moving too fast. We cut corners we can't afford to cut. We can always afford it, Richard said. Speed is value. Value is our job. Not if someone sues, Ethan countered. We missed a posting. We staged alarms. It's sloppy. Sloppy gets expensive. Richard flipped through the pages without reading them and slid the folder back. So post the posting, stop the alarms. Don't confuse tactics with strategy. The strategy is we reposition the asset, we maximize return, we exit. There are families there, Ethan said, surprising himself again with the raw edge in his voice. Programs that keep kids from getting eaten by the street. We can reposition without burning it down. Spare me the sermon, Richard said, bored now. The way power gets bored by conscience unless conscience affects the bottom line. You're drifting, son. Asset, return, exit. I taught you the order on purpose. You taught me to win, Ethan said. Maybe I'm learning how not to lose myself. Something flickered in Richard's eyes, annoyance shading toward something like alarm. Is this about a woman? He asked. Too sharp, too fast. Ethan kept his face still. This is about our firm not behaving like a cartoon villain. Cartoons are popular, Richard said. And you're not paid to be popular. You're paid to be effective. Be effective. Ethan left with the folder not because he lost, but because arguing would have turned into a performance, and he was tired of pretending. In the elevator, his phone lit up with a text from a number he didn't recognize. Yo, it's Rafa, Maya's brother. If you're the suit who thinks he's going to be a hero. We got enough of those on TV. Prove it. He smiled despite the day. He typed back, I have coffee. Does that count? Rafa replied with an address and the words black nitrogen monoxide sugar. If you bring almond milk, I'm telling everyone. He arrived at the center early the next morning with a cardboard box that smelled like miracles. Mrs. Alvarez sniffed and nodded. Can stay, she said. Rafa turned out to be older than Maya by 3 years. A former line cook turned foreman who could lift a refrigerator by himself and did, once, to make a point. He had a laugh that broke tension like a crowbar and a protective streak around his sister that would have intimidated a less committed man. You the guy? Rafa asked. I'm a guy, Ethan said, and I'm here. That's worth a small coupon. Maintenance, Rafa said, leading him to a closet that contained 2 brooms, a mop older than the subway, and a toolbox with 3 screwdrivers and a nail that had aspirations to be a drill bit. The landlord lost our service contract. We do it ourselves or it doesn't get done. They spent the morning fixing what they could, a loose banister, a sink with a drip that was more like a formal resignation, a stubborn lock. Ethan learned the right way to coax a stripped screw. Without swearing too much, he learned the center's rhythm, the fragile ballet of overlapping needs, and found, to his own surprise, that manual work steadied him, quieted a part of his mind that was always calculating. Maya floated in and out, teaching, organizing, haggling with the printer on Flushing for 20 extra posters because your ink faded like an old tattoo. When she paused, she watched him, curiosity dialing toward something softer. He caught her looking once and raised an eyebrow. She rolled her eyes and pretended to be offended. They were, without naming it, beginning to speak a language that didn't require words. At lunch, they sat on the brownstone steps across the street with paper plates on their knees. A man rolled a cart past selling mangoes in small plastic cups sprinkled with chili and lime. The sky was the color of a nickel and smelled like summer threatening to remember itself. How does a person like you end up caring about a place like this? Maya asked. Not unkindly, a person like me, he echoed. Money polite, she said. Looks good in rooms with carpets. Has a father who makes plans for other people's lives. You're not wrong, he said. My mother wasn't. Money, though. She was a school counselor in Washington Heights. Knew everyone's name, their dog's name, their moods. I used to go with her to weekend programs when I was a kid. Homework club. Dance classes in a gym that smelled like sneakers and hope. She died when I was 19. I thought the way to honor her was to make it so I could fix the world. With checks, he smiled without humor. Checks are useful. They're also easy to hide behind. Maya's face softened. I'm sorry, she said. My dad left when I was 3. My mum, she worked 2 jobs until her heart reminded her she was human. She's okay now, mostly. Rafa raised me more than he admits. Music is the only thing that made all the noise make sense. He nodded. That's how your playing sounded, he said, and she turned away too quickly for him not to notice the flush climbing her neck. Don't get poetic on me, she said, toast in hand like a warning. I'm suspicious of people who can afford metaphors. Noted, he said, and saved his metaphors for later. If a story were a straight line, they would have fallen in love slowly, the way leaves fall soft and inevitable. But New York complicates lines. That afternoon, a man in a navy suit and an expression like polished granite walked into the center with 2 other men and a clipboard thick enough to be weaponized. Building inspection, he said, on behalf of the owner. Mrs. Alvarez folded her arms. You don't get to on behalf me without notice. And you don't do it during art hours. 1 hour, the man said, or we come back with an order. Ethan stepped forward before he could stop himself. Show me your authorization, he said, hand out. The man looked him up and down. Who are you? Compliance, Ethan lied icily, his voice carrying the exact boredom of someone used to auditing people for sport. If you're here without proper notice, I can put this off your calendar for a month and you can explain to your boss why you lost your slot. The man hesitated. Ethan pressed. If you had posted the Form Q27 notice, you wouldn't need to show cause today. But you didn't, did you? He had no idea whether a Q27 existed. He gambled that bureaucracy always did. The man shifted, annoyed at having to stand still. We posted. Not where it counts, Ethan said. You know that. I know that. Come back Friday at 10 a.m. with the correct documents and no kids present. We'll walk you through with counsel. The man weighed his options and sat down, his clipboard like a defeated knight surrendering a shield. Friday, he said, and left with the others, the door banging just hard enough to promise they'd be back with sharper teeth. Maya exhaled a laugh that was equal parts relief and alarm. Who are you? She asked, echoing the inspector without the contempt. Someone who knows which forms sound scary, he said. You made up a number, didn't you? I made up a tone, he said. The number came free. She shook her head, smiling. Your trouble, she said. Accurate, he said, and found himself wanting very badly to be the kind of trouble that made her life better instead of louder. Wednesday came with a storm that couldn't make up its mind. All day, the clouds hovered like a question someone was afraid to ask. By evening, the air in Williamsburg felt like a kettle about to sing. Maya stayed late at the center, finishing signed sketches with a handful of teenagers who insisted on making everything look like a mixtape cover. Rafa fixed a flicker in the hallway light with the gravity of a surgeon. Ethan texted that he'd swing by after a late meeting. She didn't admit even to herself that she kept checking the door. At 8:41 p.m. the fire alarm screamed. The sound punched through conversation and sent everyone moving at once. They drilled enough to know the drill. Little kids to the blue mat, teens to the side exit, staff to the checklist. Maya grabbed the first aid kit. Rafa swept the bathrooms. Mrs. Alvarez took the clipboard like a shield. They spilled into the street, a churning river of bodies and questions, and watched smoke pour from the basement door like a bad idea. Gas line. Rafa shouted over the noise. Kitchen's off. Someone answered. Maya counted head 6 short. Then 5 when 2 teens burst out laughing at their own lateness. Then 3, then Junior, she said, every part of her going cold. He'd run back for his drawing, of course, he had. The world doesn't make exceptions just because we tell kids not to be precious. Maya barreled toward the door. Rafa caught her arm. No, it's Junior, she said, and something in her brother's face changed calculations she recognized. The math of risk he pretended was instinct. I go, he said, and was already moving when Ethan arrived like he'd sprinted straight out of a boardroom. What happened? Ethan demanded, scanning faces, clocking fear with the same focus he used on numbers. Kid inside, Maya said, and he didn't waste a second nodding. He grabbed the nearest fire extinguisher, snapped the pin with a twist, and dove after Rafa. Smoke clawed the hallway. Visibility dropped to a dim smear of shapes and heat and the memory of walls, Ethan kept a hand on the right side, low, like he'd been taught in a safety briefing he'd never expected to use. Junior, he shouted, and his voice came back wrong. Here. A small voice coughed from the art room, thin and brave and terrified. Rafa got to him first, sweeping him up with the tenderness big men keep for small people. Ethan pulled the extinguisher's handle and hissed a path back toward the door, clearing pockets of air as if he could carve breathing room from cave. They burst out to street noise and relief. Maya grabbed Junior, checked him with quick hands, then hugged him so hard he protested with laughter and tears. Fire trucks wailed closer. A neighbor who'd once been a nurse pressed wet cloths into shaking hands. Mrs. Alvarez took names like a general. The smoke thinned, replaced by anger that came in crisp, focused slices. Electrical, the captain said 20 minutes later, helmet under his arm, but messy, looks like someone jimmied the breaker panel. Whoever did it wasn't paying for the repairs. Everyone knew what that meant. Test the alarms, trigger unsafe conditions, push them out with fear. Maya turned to Ethan and found him already looking at her, soot on his sleeve, tie gone, the watch face dull with ash. We fix it, he said, voice steady. We report it, Mrs. Alvarez added, her eyes flint, and we don't let them use this to shut us down. They spent the next 2 hours turning chaos into a plan. Ethan photographed everything, Rafa, and to Dad's patched what they could. Maya calmed parents with a calm she invented for the moment and would pay for later. When it was finally quiet, the center smelled like wet drywall and stubbornness. Walk you home, Ethan said softly. It didn't sound like a question. They crossed toward South 4th, the bridge a ribcage over their heads. The city felt rinsed, emptied out. Maya carried Junior's smoke-streaked drawing in her bag the way you carry proof. You could have not come in, she said, not looking at him. I could have, he agreed. Why did you? He considered lying, turning the answer into a joke, but something about the night straightened his truth. Because you would have, he said. She laughed once, surprised into it. That is a terrible answer, she said, but she didn't hide the way it warmed her. And, thanks. They stopped at her building, a walk-up with a temperamental buzzer and a window that caught late light just right. She put a hand on the railing and then turned back. You smell like a campfire, she said. You smell like turpentine, he said, flattering, she replied, and then, before she could talk herself out of it, she stepped closer and pressed black smudges from her thumb onto the clean edge of his collar. There, she said. Now you belong to something you didn't buy. The air between them tightened and hummed. She almost reached for him. He almost reached back. Instead, she lifted the strap of her bag higher, climbed 2 steps and paused at the door. Friday at 10, she said. Bring that tone you used on clipboard, guy. I'll bring a lawyer, he said. Even better, she said, and disappeared into the stairwell with a wave that felt too casual for a night like this. By sunrise, the emails began. Ethan found 4 from Camille, 2 from legal, and 1 from his father that said only, see me 9 o'clock. Camille's office wore black like a uniform. She poured coffee like a ritual and slid a dossier across the table. Hawthorne bought the Kent Avenue note at a discount. She said, we foreclose, we reposition, we exit. You're not going to make this sentimental. The building caught fire last night, Ethan said. The messy kind. Her expression didn't change. We didn't light it. Someone jimmied the breaker, he pressed. Find me proof, she said. Not feelings. The city has 200 fires a night. Don't staple them to my desk like a poem. Ethan kept his voice even. We missed a posting. If they fight, we lose 90 days. If we try to evict while under investigation for safety, we lose more. The fastest path to exit is to negotiate. Camille leaned back, sharp as ever. You're asking me to blink first. I'm asking you not to drive into a wall you can see, he said. She studied him for a beat too long. Is this about your mother? She asked, a scalpel disguised as a question. It's about not being lazy, he lied, and stood. I'll send you a revised timeline. With compliance. Do, she said, and Ethan, your father's going to ask if this is about a woman. Decide in advance what you're going to say. He knocked on Richard's door at 8:59. The office was already full of impatience. Richard waved him in without warmth. You're spooking people, he said. Compliance isn't spooky, Ethan replied. It's math. This, Richard gestured broadly, encompassing the idea of empathy like a gnat. This is not math. This is you trying to make up for something you didn't do wrong. You were 19. Your mother made her own choices. It was the wrong thing to say. Pain lit up old circuits. Ethan turned it into ice. We're off topic. The topic is that Camille says you're kneecapping her deal with negotiate and post the posting, and no more alarm tests, Richard said. We build our edge by doing what other people won't. Stop sanding it off. Ethan's jaw flexed. Our edge can include obeying the law. Richard smiled like a man certain he already owned the end of your sentence. If you want a different edge, find another table, he said. There's a vice president's slot in London if you want to cool off. But if you stay in New York, you deliver or? Ethan asked, and the room's temperature dropped. Or you learn what exit means when it's not a building, Richard said, turning back to his monitor. Dismissing him with the subtlest flick of a hand, Ethan left with the shape of a choice etched into him. In the elevator he texted Priya Shah. They'd met at Columbia when he was the one explaining finance to people who already understood it, and she was the one explaining the law to people who didn't know it would someday apply to them. Now she worked at a firm that loved a fight with a developer almost as much as it loved a class action. You still like making my life harder, he wrote. Depends, she replied. Is IT about a tenant association? If it's about your love life, hard pass. Community center, he typed. Fires, missed postings, bad faith. Meet me there at 9:45 Friday, she wrote. Also, I'm billing you in friendship points. I'm broke, he replied. Sell a watch, she said. At the center, the morning felt like a hangover in a rally. Parents dropped off with double hugs. Maya wore paint-splattered overalls like armor. When she saw Ethan, her smile was small but real. Lawyer, she asked Priya, he said. Sharpest person I know. She'll terrify them in complete sentences. Before he could say more, Rafa came in holding a takeout bag in one hand and a flyer he'd ripped from a lamppost in the other. You're not going to like this, he said, and slapped the paper onto the table. It was an announcement for a charity gala headlined by a community renewal initiative, with a keynote by none other than Richard Vale. The event promised responsible redevelopment and used a photo of a playground that was not in fact the one at 317 Kent. Maya felt the room tilt. Your father, she said, each word carefully separated from the next. Ethan's stomach sank. Public relations, he said. They host these when they're about to do something unpopular. Call it a conversation. Control the narrative. Does he know about this place? She asked. He knows numbers, Ethan said. He didn't add, he knows how to use my face as proof that we care. Maya's mouth tightened. Don't let him, she said. I won't, he said, and believed it when he said it. By 9:55 a.m. Friday, the center looked like a documentary scene. You only appreciate if you know how much work it takes to make casual look organized. Tables cleared, hallways taped, documentation stacked, labeled and tabbed like a wedding binder. Mrs. Alvarez wore her navy coat like a verdict. Priya arrived with a leather portfolio and the calm of someone who could dismantle a policy with a raised eyebrow. She hugged Ethan like they were still 22 and then turned to Maya with a smile that reached her eyes. I'm Priya, she said. I hear you make violins cry in public places. Sometimes, Maya said. She liked her immediately. Priya's presence steadied the room, tempered Ethan's sharp edges, and made Mrs. Alvarez nod once and think, fine, you can sit at my table. The inspectors came with clipboards and the aura of men who'd never been offered a cookie while doing their job. Priya met them at the door, requested business cards, wrote names down slowly so they'd feel watched, and then led the walkthrough with the quiet authority of a surgeon conducting a tour of a rib cage. Please note the unlawful alarm tests. On Wednesday, she said at the electrical panel, pointing to tool marks that looked like fingerprints pressed too hard. Photographs and timestamps here. She passed a sheet to the lead inspector. Also note that no Form 56P intent to enter notice was posted 7 days prior, as required. We're not opposed to inspection, we're opposed to theater. Who are you? The lead inspector asked, already irritated at being managed. Counsel, she said, and moved on before he could feel the battle slip out of his hand. It might have gone smoothly, except trouble doesn't like to be left out of a good day. 10 minutes in, the door opened and in walked Camille Hart in a suit that looked like it would never forgive a wrinkle, and beside her, Richard. For a split second, the room froze. Ethan felt heat crawl up his neck. Maya felt a shape click into a place inside her chest, like a key turning in a lock you don't remember installing. Good morning, Richard said, voice smooth enough to skate on. We're here to cooperate fully. Of course, Mrs. Alvarez said, looking at him like a storm cloud looks at a picnic. Camille's gaze flicked across the room and landed on Ethan with a 3-beat story. You chose a side. Don't trip, I'm watching. Priya stepped in, body half blocking Ethan's father without making it a spectacle. You can observe, she said. Please refrain from speaking unless addressed by the inspector, and if you have any documents to provide, I'd be delighted to receive them. They moved to the basement. The air held the aftertaste of smoke. The inspector shined a light along a length of ductwork and frowned. Who disturbed this? He asked. The tape looked new. The dust pattern looked wrong. Your contractors, Priya said. On Tuesday we have video. Disturbing ducts in a pre-war building triggers an asbestos protocol, the inspector murmured, half to himself. You file the plan. Camille's mouth tightened. Our contractor filed all required documents, she said. Then produce them, Priya said, a smile that didn't bother pretending to be friendly. We'll wait. A second inspector returned from the far corner, holding up a small plastic tag. This is a negative air machine monitor, he said. Where's the machine? Silence stretched. The inspectors exchanged a look. One scribbled, notes with new energy, the kind of energy that made developers nervous. Richard recovered first. We'll get you anything you need, he said. And the inspector nodded like a man who knew the taste of later. The walkthrough took another 20 minutes. Enough violations surfaced to put any aggressive timeline into a freezer. When it ended, Priya collected copies. The inspectors left, and the room exhaled. Great, Mrs. Alvarez said briskly. Now we keep the pressure on, letters, calls, press, if we must. We must, Rafa said darkly, holding up his phone with photos that made the duct look like a throat with fingerprints around it. It almost felt like a win, one of those quiet, procedural wins that don't feel like a movie, but change everything. And then a voice behind them said, too casually, we'll, of course, work with the community to find a solution that works. Maya turned. Richard was looking at her as if she were part of his set. What's your name? He asked, ready to use it later. Maya, she said. Not for your speech. Powerful name, he said. I'm Richard Vale. I know, she said, and watched a flicker of confusion cross his face, then shift into calculation. Father, he added, as if offering context. The word hit like a floor dropping out. People talk about a sinking feeling like it's poetic. It isn't. It's your body realizing the map you're standing on just lied. Maya looked at Ethan, not his suit, not his watch, just his face. You knew, she said. For letters. No cushion. He opened his mouth, closed it, and tried again. I was going to tell you, he said. True and useless when, she asked, voice low. Before or after you helped your family evict us? I'm trying to stop them, he said, and everyone heard the them. Rafa stepped in, protective and boiling. You walked us through paperwork for a building your people want to gut, he said, disbelief sharpening into fury. You put your hands on a fire extinguisher so we'd forget who lit the match. That's not fair, Ethan said, the words tasting like he'd chosen the wrong courtroom and the wrong judge. Life isn't. Mrs. Alvarez said, softer than he deserved. But honesty is. You should have walked in on Tuesday and said, I'm the enemy and I'm trying not to be. I would have listened. Maya's eyes were wet and bright and hard. I don't need a savior, she said. I needed the truth. He reached for her and stopped. Let me fix this, he said. The kind of promise a man makes when he's out of currency but not out of debt. Maybe fix you first, she said, and walked away before the room could become a room, with witnesses to something they couldn't unsee. The hours after a fall from grace moved differently. Sound sticks, time smears, people avoid your eyes or stare too long. Ethan spent them doing what he'd promised, fixing. He called Priya. He called a reporter he trusted. He called a contractor who owed him a favor and told him to stop touching the building unless he wanted his license to spend a lovely summer vacation. At 3:17 p.m., Camille sent an email. You're suspended from the Kent Avenue account. Hand off materials by Cobb. Richard called at 3:19. Come back to the office. We'll contain this. At 3:21, he blocked the number for the first time in his life. He forwarded Priya every document he could legally and a few he could questionably access. Invoices for alarm tests, change orders with missing signatures, a side letter promising a bonus to a contractor if tenant movement accelerated under 90 days. Jesus, Vale, Priya texted after skimming. This is the ugly kind. Are you ready to be the story? I don't need to be the story, he wrote back. I just need them to stop. This may cost you your job, she replied. Then, I'll get a different one, he said, and startled himself with the freedom of typing it. The reporter Aisha Malik, a local bulldog who preferred city stories to anything with a national scent, agreed to meet on the corner under the awning of a bakery that made croissants so good they softened hard news. He handed her copies, explained the timeline without turning it into a monologue, and answered questions without lawyering the truth. Off the record about my internal access, he said. On the record about the documents themselves. You know they'll come for you, she said. Equal parts warning and promise. They already did, he said, and she nodded like it. Box of wood back at the center, Maya painted to quiet the chaos in her head. Not the mural sketches of motion and smoke, and a hand on a handle pulling a door open. She painted like a person negotiating with herself. Rafa hovered, fixing a chair that didn't need fixing, making noise because silence felt like surrender. You okay? He asked finally, like a brother and a father and a friend and a man who knew what she wanted before she admitted it. No, she said, but I'm proud of me for not forgiving a pretty face with the right words, she said, for not making it about the way he looked at me. For remembering who taught me to hold a line. Mom, he said. Mom, she echoed, and smiled despite the ache. You think I'm wrong? I think you're right to be mad, Rafa said. I also think people are messier than our labels. He did run into a burning building for Junior. That doesn't buy him a pass. She said. No, he agreed, but it buys him a second look. When you're ready. She wasn't not. Yet the truth is we rarely change our minds because someone tells us to. We change because time and evidence and love build a case we can't ignore. At 6:12 p.m., Aisha's story went live. The headline was the kind that gets read. Community Center alleges dirty eviction tactics. Docs show alarm tests. Missing notices. Asbestos red flags. Her writing did what good writing does, made the complicated feel clear without making it simple. She quoted Mrs. Alvarez. She quoted Priya. She quoted a person with knowledge of the firm's practices, and anyone who knew Ethan would know. But strangers wouldn't. The article landed like a brick through a glass plane. Camille called at 6:20. He let it go to voicemail. Richard emailed at 6:27. You're done. Pack your desk. He replied at 6:28. Will do. Please direct all Kent Ave comms to council. Then he powered down his work phone and sat very still in his apartment, looking out over a city he suddenly felt like he could live in without apologizing to himself. At 7:03 p.m., his buzzer rang. He almost didn't answer. He did. Maya stood in the hallway with a bag of empanadas and a look he couldn't read. "Rafa made me bring you food so I wouldn't bring you opinions," she said. "I'll take both," he said, stepping aside. She didn't kiss him, she didn't forgive him. She sat at his counter, watched him find plates like he'd never used one before, and then said, "You gave them evidence." "Yes," he said, "and you got yourself fired." "I got myself free," he said, and meant it more than he expected. "Why?" she asked. "Don't say because it's right. That's lazy." "Because if I'm going to be someone," he said, "I want to be the someone I am when I'm in that building with you." She looked down at the empanada she'd broken in half and put it back together. "That's also lazy," she said softly. "But it's a start." They ate in companionable, not quite truce. When she left, she paused at the door. "Tomorrow," she said, "we start the mural. We don't wait for permission. We take the wall behind the basketball hoop. If they paint over it, we paint again." "I'll be there," he said. "You'll carry ladders." She said, "I will," he said, and when the door closed he leaned his head against it and breathed like a man who'd had just stepped into a life and found that the floor held. Saturday morning, the center's back lot was a battlefield of paint cans, ladders, and caffeine. The air smelled like primer and ambition. A wall the size of a small billboard loomed behind the basketball hoop, faded beige and chipped in places. Waiting. Maya stood at the center of it all in ripped jeans and a tank top. Hair pulled into a scarf, eyes already narrowed in focus. She'd sketched the mural on paper and taped copies to the wall, two hands reaching for each other. One smeared with paint, the other wearing a signet ring. Around them a swirl of color representing the city subway lines bending into rivers, rooftops spilling into gardens, faces hidden in the shapes like constellations. Ethan arrived carrying ladders as ordered. "You're late," she said without turning. "It's 8:02, he replied. "That's late," Mrs. Alvarez said, handing him a bucket of brushes. Kids from the neighborhood swarmed like bees, dipping into the paint before Maya even gave the okay. Rafa took control of the top section, balancing on a ladder like gravity owed him money. Priya showed up in jeans, surprising everyone. "I'm not just here for subpoenas," she said, rolling paint with the precision of someone who'd once been an overachieving kid in art class. Ethan painted two not big strokes, but filling in the edges Maya marked with chalk. She caught him tracing the lines carefully, and for a moment, the air between them softened. "You're not bad," she admitted. "You're not easy to impress," he replied. "That's the point," she said, but her smile betrayed her. By noon, the wall began to come alive. The hands took shape, the swirls found their rhythm. Neighbors stopped to watch. Someone set up speakers, and a playlist bounced between salsa, hip-hop, and a violin cover of Empire State of Mind. Then a black SUV pulled up, the kind of SUV that never comes without an agenda. Camille stepped out in designer flats, trailed by a man with a camera. "You're trespassing," she said crisply, scanning the wall. "This is our wall," Mrs. Alvarez countered. "Our center, our paint." "The landlord disagrees," Camille said. "I'll have to notify the board." "Already did," Priya said, holding up her phone. "And you know what's funny? This qualifies as a temporary art installation, protected under the Visual Artists' Rights Act. Touch it without consent, and you're looking at a federal case." Camille's smile didn't reach her eyes. "This isn't over." "Good," Mrs. Alvarez said. "Neither is the mural." The SUV left, the music returned, and the wall kept filling. By sundown, the hands almost touched, their fingers surrounded. By the city in full bloom, people clapped, kids posed for photos, and for the first time in weeks, the block felt like it belonged to itself. Maya looked at Ethan. "Tomorrow's the gala," she said. "I know," he said. "You're going." "Yes." She studied him, weighing something in her mind. "Then you'd better make it count." The ballroom at the Midtown Regency glittered under chandeliers that looked like they'd been imported from another century. Waiters moved like choreography, trays balanced high. Attendees in gowns and tuxedos clustered in corners, trading cards and smiles that never reached their eyes. Richard Vale owned the room before he stepped on stage. His keynote was set for 8 o'clock, and the program promised visionary insights on responsible redevelopment. Ethan arrived in the same tux he'd worn to deals where the ink was worth more than the building, but tonight his pocket square carried a faint smear of blue paint from the mural, a reminder, a choice. He spotted Camille near the stage, whispering to the event organizer. Richard worked the crowd, shaking hands like he was collecting favors. Priya slid up beside Ethan. "Ready?" she asked. "Not really," he said. "Good," she replied. "Fear keeps you interesting." At 8 o'clock sharp, Richard took the podium. He spoke about urban renewal, about creating opportunities, about balancing community needs with economic realities. He had the cadence of someone who'd said the same thing in 100 rooms. Ethan waited until the applause, then stepped forward. "I'm Ethan Vale," he said into the mic before anyone could stop him, "and I worked for Hawthorne Capital. the firm behind 317 Kent Avenue. The community center you've seen in our promotional materials. The room shifted. Conversations stilled. Cameras turned. What you haven't seen, Ethan continued, are the alarm tests staged to intimidate tenants. The missing notices, the asbestos protocols ignored. I've brought the documents and I've brought the people this affects. On cue, Mrs. Alvarez, Maya, Rafa, and a group from the center entered from the side doors. Priya handed packets to reporters in the room. Photos of the mural flashed on the projector screen, hands reaching, colors swirling. This, Ethan said, gesturing to the images, is what community looks like, not condos, not rooftop bars. People, if we're serious about responsible redevelopment, it starts with not destroying what's already working. Richard's voice cut in, sharp. Ethan, that's enough. No, Ethan said, louder, it's exactly enough. Applause broke, not from everyone, but from enough to shift the air. The cameras caught Richard's frown, Camille's icy stillness, and Maya's face in the crowd, unreadable but present. 2 days later, Ethan sat in Mrs. Alvarez's cramped office while Priya paced with a legal pad. Across from them, a representative from a philanthropic trust laid out the proposal. They would buy 317 Kent from Hawthorne Capital at fair market value, then transfer it to a community land trust, permanently protecting it from speculative redevelopment. It wasn't charity, it was leverage. Hawthorne, under PR pressure from the gala fallout and Aisha's follow-up stories, wanted out fast. The trust could close in weeks. We'll need fundraising to cover renovations, the rep said, but the building will be yours. Mrs. Alvarez looked at Ethan, then at Maya. What do you think? I think, Maya said, we paint the rest of the wall when the ink dries. The deal closed on a Friday. The following Saturday, the mural's two hands finally touched, the fingers meeting in a burst of gold paint. The block threw a party, music, food, dancing under string lights. Ethan and Maya stood at the base of the wall, watching kids weave between tables. You didn't just fix the building, she said. You fixed something in yourself. Work in progress, he said. But I had a good teacher. She smiled. Then, and this time when he reached for her, she didn't pull away. They kissed under the mural while the city hummed around them to people from different worlds, who decided the line between them was worth crossing, worth painting over, worth keeping. If you loved Ethan and Maya's journey, rate this story from 0 to 10 in the comments and subscribe for more incredible tales of love, redemption, and second chances. Don't forget to hit the notification bell so you never miss another story. And remember, the walls between us are only as strong as we let them be, so paint yours with something worth keeping.